This is a PRAKSIS podcast.
So I'm Rudolf Kangwa, a lapidarian from Zambia, trained in Zambia, been practicing for 16 years, passionate about education and passionate about extractive communities. And I run Rudolf's Gems with Bwalya Bwalya Kangwa, who's got a background in finance with a degree in mathematics from University of Winnipeg in Canada.
Yes, and my name is Tereza Østbø Kuldova. I'm a research professor at the Goethe-Institut Norwegen at the Oslo Metropolitan University. And I'm a social anthropologist, and I've been studying lots of different topics, but luxury industry, corruption, anti-corruption, regulations, compliance business from a kind of critical, qualitative perspective. So
I think we're more in talking about what regulations have done in our part of our business, and your thoughts on how you think it evolved and what you might think. I'm not going to say what it does first, but your thoughts of how it's evolved in terms of certification.
Yes. So this is kind of a long story, but we can try to make it short. The West, during the Cold War, had a very clear enemy, right? Russia, communism, and so forth. And in the 90s, it was kind of to define itself, it had to look for a new enemy, I would say. And I think that the new enemy became corruption. You imagine suddenly all the other countries outside of the West as deeply corrupt, as systemically corrupt, whereas corruption in the West would be imagined as something pertaining to an individual, for instance, right? Like a corrupt official or something. And this had profound implications, I think, this way of thinking, because you suddenly implemented a lot of anti-corruption policies that also were used to spread neoliberal thinking, neoliberal governance also into countries, what were called the third world and so forth. And these kind of regulations, be it have kind of proliferated, be it anti-corruption, then it has evolved into kind of anti-money laundering regulations, anti-trafficking. Now we have regulations against forced labor. And there is a certain shared logic to these regulations. First, they very often emerge in response to a certain scandal. Right, so you would have a scandal in be it in the West or in an African country, let's say Nigeria, corruption, you can imagine, and there would be a lot of media focus, and luxury would be very often used as the kind of symbol of the corrupt. Right, during the war in Ukraine, you would designate all these corrupt oligarchs, and you would say their luxury is dirty. Right. Whereas in a certain sense, we imagine that our luxury, like be it Musk or whatever, our luxury in the West is pure and clean, but theirs is dirty. So you imagine this kind of pollution on the other side, and you can say, yes, the oligarchs are not good guys. This is not the point, but this is how you kind of split the world in the kind of Western imaginary, I think. And this is the first step. The moment you have established this kind of scandal, you always need a kind of reaction to it. Like the state would like to have a reaction, right? The people would like to have a reaction. And then the question is, what do you implement as in response to these scandals? And very often you tend to implement one particular type of regulation. This is not a question of that all regulation is bad, not at all. This is a question of what are we implementing in response to these scandals? And very often we implement things that require, for instance, and this is the thing, like we can all unite, like there is a huge consensus, right? Corruption is bad, terrorism is bad, trafficking is bad, forced labor is bad, violent conflict is bad, conflict diamonds become a kind of a thing there. But what do we do in the name of these kind of of this kind of consensus? What is the result? We implement policies and solutions that require businesses, for instance, to perform a range of compliance and due diligence solutions, right? We have to check banks have to do suspicious activity reporting, produce intelligence for the state. And now we have a supply chain due diligence. You have to check, your suppliers, are they somehow involved in some crime? We produce an enormous amount of data. that can be used by the financial industry as well. And you kind of rely on all these kind of virtual processes, certification, authentication, all kinds of forms of verification. These become a proxy for cleanliness, right? If you have these formal processes, formal procedures, then you are a trustworthy actor, legitimate actor, pure actor in the market. You are not connected to these evils. But these policies are being sold to us as a kind of solution to fighting crime. So they are saying, like, we're fighting crime through these regulations, right? But they're not actually doing it. The crime is still there. They are not solving the problems proactively, but they are kind of creating legitimate actors. And then the question becomes, who has the power to produce and generate all this data? Well, it's very often the big corporations. They have legal teams, they have compliance teams, they have data scientists that can generate enormous amounts of disclosures. And so you can see who is lobbying for these regulations is also a question that is interesting, which we don't have time to discuss. But you can see that we are creating a world where we are increasingly fighting crimes on the ground through kind of fictions. So the one thing I think that you can, see consequences of in your own practice.
I think one of the things in the discussion, in what you said, what's interesting is, for example, certification in gemstones is very focused on what the West are able to produce. So I'll give you an example that they'll talk about the quality of the stone and everything else. But in their certification, there's never authentication of where the gemstone is coming from. I don't like the only authentication they're asking for is pictures of a person, right? It's in their documentation, it doesn't say who the person is. Would that change? What change could that make in, for example, if a certification indicates that Jim picked up the stone and almost like a chain of documentary, would that make it more authentic? Is that something the West could beat us on? I don't know if that makes sense.
And also just to add on that, do you think having these institutions away from the origin or from the communities where the resources are coming from, disadvantage is intentionally to disadvantage the small players?
I'm not sure if intentionally, but it's certainly a product of these regulations. And you can say that it is in the interest of big corporations to lobby for these types of regulations. If they, and what are they being punished for if they are ever punished? They are punished for non-compliance, for not having nice programs enough, right? Mm-hmm. They are not punished for actually sourcing things from wrong places. They are punished for not having a nice program. So they might pay a fine, but the fine is kind of a cost of doing business, right? So I don't know. I mean, these kind of certification schemes and so forth, they rely on this idea that that kind of data-fied information will somehow, and transparency will automatically translate into change. But there is no direct link in collecting data and having kind of real impact, right? So I think that the problem with these policies is that drive this kind of surveillance capitalist tech logic as well, right? You generate new data, you can add a new kind of thing in the form, in the certificate, but will it change the reality, right? I mean, because you will always have the problem of what does it actually refer to in reality. You can fill it out anything in a form and it can look good, right? So we have a problem of this enormous growth of these kind of tech companies that are providing blockchain certificates, and the fact that the data from the metadata from the certification is already used to create new financial products for the financial markets, right? So there is a kind of collusion, let's say, of the financial markets, of the investor-driven things, with kind of using the popular resentment and complaints of people, we have real problems, we have real crime, the crime is real, the social issues are real, right? But then the kind of resentment and the drive towards, the anger towards the system is then channeled into these solutions that actually reproduce the problem, right? And they do not really address it. So all these kind of due diligence compliance things, I don't think they are a solution. I mean, for a business, to compete, you have to kind of submit to it.
Yes.
But I think, especially coming from countries that are seen by the West as less worth, you will always be kind of running after their forms of verification, their forms of to be included in their system in order to be able to compete.
And they have the capacity, they have the capital to put up all these structures, so they're already at an advantage.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Because for you to collect data, you need to have a team. So you have a team of lawyers, you have a team of accountants, you have all this team that really is a big wedge bill.
Yeah.
But people coming from third world countries, as they put it, you have to jump through hoops for you to just have a team like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say it like very clearly in, for instance, the kind of civil society NGO space, where, in order to be worthy and credible and worthy of funding from the West, you would need to have all these kind of formal processes in place, right? You have to have a nice website. You have to have a guideline for your workers. You have to have anti-corruption policy. You have to have anti-money laundering policy. You have to have all these policies. Nobody asks you if you actually follow them, but you have to have them in place.
Yes.
So you have to embrace the language of this kind of what I call the compliance industrial complex in order to even be seen as worthy. And in the meantime, you have Western-based tech companies / legal companies that are already ranking, NGOs in India, in Africa, in Latin America, saying who is worthy of receiving funding. And then obviously those, okay, and this is the one thing, like who is becoming legitimate and who is seen as illegitimate, right? And who has the power to define who is a trustworthy actor? So it's how you manufacture trust, right? And so you see that this is far less about actually fighting any crime or a security threats or so on. It's about kind of generating data and capturing markets and having the power of making the distinction of who is going to remain a supplier, a cheap supplier, and who is going to have the power over them to capitalize on that. So it's a form of kind of regulatory neocolonialism or something like that, you could say, that you definitely see that, but this is directed also at companies within Western countries, like even small companies here would have to, struggle with this. This is kind of common, but you can see that the primary direction is to keep, cheap labor in India and so forth, other places. So this is the thing, and I think the biggest problem with these policies is that they are, driven by this logic of, fighting crime and security threats. So you always, you always try to investigate people as if they are suspect, right? So the banks have to do it now. The art market participants have to do it under the anti-money laundering directive. You have to do your KYC, know your customer. Then there is not only KYC anymore, it's also know your employee, KYE, which means screening and background checks, and the industry is rigged towards screening individuals and small companies or suppliers and clients, But this kind of information does not translate necessarily into decisions. It just gets accumulated somewhere, and it's the purpose is unclear. So you're fighting through a kind of logic that kind of pluralizes policing and intelligence. So suddenly, like big intelligence, like what the intelligence agencies used to do is now a practice that companies and corporations do, both against their customers and against their employees. So you have a kind of a surveillance system, but it doesn't really translate into any positive vision, right? So if you would really take security seriously, if you would take conflict diamonds seriously, if you would take other things seriously, then you would have to approach that from a position of what kind of society do we want. what is the positive, what would be a positive regulation, right? So I think that, yes, in the current system as it exists, you can seek to add your own understanding of what a good certification would be. But I think that you will always already be in a position of submission, and a kind of the question is, how can small businesses and these countries regain sovereignty in a certain sense, and decide for themselves what is good for their society? I feel that this is, this kind of imposition of this narrative that, the formal is the pure and the clean. It has really emptied out both politics and ethics.
Do you think the multinational companies are ready to allow the third world countries to structure their own format of what they would call?
No. I think you have to, say that multinational companies, yes, but they are also companies based in these countries. Like when I was working in India, right? The Indian elites and the Indian business elites are perfectly skilled in exploiting their own people, right? So there is no, there is no kind of nationality in the multinational corporate world. So you're equally happy to extract from your own people as you are to extract from others.
Yeah.
So I think that, it becomes doubly problematic where your own elites do not work for you.
But they come backed by a group of other friends who are also as greedy as they are.
Yeah.
And it's like a global camp of greedy, wealthy elitists.
You can say that, and you can say that what becomes extremely kind of troubling is that we had a period where we understood business as very much for profit, only interested in profit and accumulation, and this was the correct representation. Okay, the purpose of the
they were
company.
honest enough to say we're making profit.
But now they are inserting themselves incredibly into governance through this kind of liberal capitalist mode, right? Where they say we're doing good, we're fighting crime, we're improving, we're lifting people out of poverty. Like there is. And we are the solution, right? And even the governments, they have come to embrace this multi-stakeholder approach. So,
Yes.
So now the kind of now we have the problem, this kind of epistemic closure at the level of governance, where this is the solution to everything, and other possibilities. It becomes even like almost unthinkable to think outside of this kind of hegemonic narrative. So I think that, we will not solve it here. But I think that, for the future, I think we should, do something, a project together on because this is really like, I don't know how my critique is a starting point.
Yes.
But how to address these things in reality is something that, we would have to kind of work out together.
Do you strongly feel education?
Actually, the education of local communities, like taking, I think that, one has to first understand and identify the problem kind of correctly. Yeah. And this is a kind of evolving process. You always learn something new. But I think that, you really kind of have to start from the basic things, education, right? Good living conditions, all these things will, you need kind of politics back and a real sense of real ethics. What we see is this kind of financialized ethics that's just like, if you have done your background checks, then we can, trust you. I mean, this is having formal procedures and systems. It is even the opposite. You just delegate your decision making to this kind of automaton that just, keeps, and so that you're kind of internally free to do all kind of greedy, obscene, illegal stuff, right? But you have this machinery that simulates ethics. And I think this is becoming a very kind of prevalent problem. So I think we need to call your new forms of politics, new forms of ethics and justice, and yes, and insist that this system is not just in any sense of the word. So if you operate with, we live in the rule of the law countries in the West. I mean, like, when, where? Show me.
I strongly believe this should be a community-driven before it gets to global-driven.
Yeah.
Start with communities. If the communities are educated enough about what is theirs and what they need to know about what is theirs, I'm sure, I strongly feel they'll be able to stand up and say, if you have to take this from me, we have to sit down and we have to be equals.
Yes.
Yes. It's when one appears to be greater than the other, especially if I'm coming to your land and I'm already at an advantage. I'll always trump on you because I'll have something to offer you like a bribe. But if I know that what I possess is greater, whenever we come to discuss, we are always at par. Or I'll even be greater than you because I know I possess something. For you to come to my land, it's because you've seen the potential to get something out of my land. So I think that's where education in communities comes in.
Yeah, and I think that the trouble there is that the educational system itself has been captured by these Western ideas. Right?
Exactly.
There's a lot of like elites, African elites, Indian elites, all educated like in the Western countries, in the Western system, and becoming kind of the good boys for translating these kind of, because this is the best practice. This is the good governance.
Yes.
Right? So I think you also would need to rethink what
kind of education. Yes.
Education. Like,
Yes.
who's doing it, right?
It should be practical.
Because this kind of professionalism, I mean, the whole compliance industry is a professionalization kind of machinery with like thousands of certificates. Like I have taken so many of these certificates, right?
Yes.
Generated within the private sector to get, to see like what knowledge are they producing. They are not really producing knowledge, they are producing enormous amounts of formalisms, right?
Yes.
So there is no substantial knowledge. And this is what I'm like thinking, like that we lack substance more and more and we've become kind of cheerleaders for form, right?
Yes.
For empty forms. Like very often, like people also repeat these empty things like, oh, AI, we need this human in the loop, right? It's like, okay, what does it mean? Like, what is this? What in what reality does it translate? And then you end up with these kind of both knowledge fictions or kind of formalistic fictions, data fictions that do not match the realities. And I think that's why I also see kind of polarization in the society. The understanding of the working class doesn't at all reflect in the understanding of the elites, right?
Yeah.
So it is generative of all sorts of things. So I think we need to rethink seriously what education and thinking means. I feel that more and more also students are interested in getting the degree, as fast as possible.
Yes.
Not thinking. This is the whole purpose of a university. Think, please. So we have these issues.
Like we need to learn how to think before it's illegal to think.
Yes. Yeah, but really the kind of cognitive or let's say epistemic capture created by these regulatory industries, by the lawyers, by the privileging of kind of psychology, technology, and law. All these three disciplines have become so powerful together and kind of amplified by the digital that you focus on the individual as a problem very often, and then you then you kind of understand the social world only through the lens of threat actors versus good actors. I mean, this is nobody is anymore asking what is generating these threat actors. Preemption becomes checking your credentials and giving you a risk score. I mean, this is not changing anything in the reality, right? This is just anticipating you as a potential threat. So all these kind of knowledge and epistemic groundings need to be charged. I think this is why we need you to kind of in a way you still need people who are not totally sucked intellectually into this paradigm that has become hegemonic in the West. I think that's we need you to show us.
I think that he's saying that yes, we could do it. It's interesting that the change is possible, but the change is still needed with the help of the West.
I'm not. Yeah.
This is a PRAKSIS podcast.